Ladies and gentlemen, and Stanback.
It wasn't until I began to think about what I wanted to say today that I realized that Davidson, an institution so formative to me, was the first place I consciously experienced sex discrimination. As a member of the 5th class of women, the discrimination I initially felt was from a few older white male professors who did not seem to like the idea that Davidson was no longer entirely male. That more amorphous disapproval was different from the blatant inequity I experienced as a female athlete. Men got the better tennis courts, more shoes, more rackets, more strings for those rackets. And then there was the much larger institutional issue of the college's admissions policy. 1,000 men, 400 women, end of discussion. I cringe at the fact that this policy was used as a selling point for women when I was an incoming student. I hear some familiarity. And I cringe even more when I look back and realize it took me until my senior year to have its wrongness sink in and to begin to support others who were working for change. I thrived at Davidson. I loved my time here. But ironically, the college shaped my leadership journey, not with classes on leadership or an abundance of female mentors, but by presenting me with concrete examples of discrimination that I could work to change. It wasn't quite the real world, but it was a training ground for work I would do over the next 40 years. My career has been spent in large part running nonprofit organizations, most of them political advocacy groups, and most of those focused on issues that are polarizing. When I led an abortion rights organization in the early 90s, we were closer in time to Roe v. Wade than to Dobbs v. Jackson. Public hearings at the state capitol were always fiery, even if the only thing that was ever thrown at me was holy water. In 2000, when we started Love Makes a Family, Connecticut's marriage equality organization, consensual sex between gay people was a criminal act in nearly a dozen states, including North Carolina. And the Vermont legislature was still a year away from creating a brand new marital status just for gay people called civil union. In our first year, opponents mostly ignored us. When they realized that we weren't going away, the dismissive taunts began. As our message got more traction and momentum built, the hate speak and death threats started. You might imagine this was the toughest part of my work, but the hardest time by far came when the conflict was not with our opponents, but with our friends. That conflict was over whether to support marriage or civil union. In the organization's early years, many of our allies and some in the LGBTQ community wondered if marriage might be a bridge too far. Even Love Makes a Family, a marriage organization, was ready to support civil unions as a first step. Then late in 2003, the Massachusetts Supreme Court ruled that there was no constitutional basis to prohibit same-sex couples from marrying. That decision, and witnessing the joy that accompanied the nation's first marriages between loving, committed same-sex couples, changed everything for us. With marriage now legal, we began to question whether we should champion civil union, a second-class marital status that a decade later, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg referred to as skim milk marriage. If we did, we feared that the momentum for marriage would disappear just as it had in Vermont. We also knew that if a civil union bill were seen as our bill, we would be in a position of having to endorse anti-gay candidates who voted for civil union as a way to avoid voting for marriage. After a great deal of heated debate, Love Makes a Family's board voted overwhelmingly to oppose a civil union bill and push hard for marriage equality in the next session. Making that decision about whether to forego critically needed rights and protections in order to stand firmly for equality was agonizing, and it came with plenty of fallout. Legislators were furious. Many of our members were angry. It was the most challenging time in our organization's existence and one of the most difficult of my professional life. It was made all the harder by having it played out on the front pages of the newspapers. But it was also the time when I learned my most valuable lessons about leadership. Here are 3 of them. Listen deeply and communicate regularly. I made a lot of mistakes, but one of the best things I did was reply to every email I received. I forced myself to read them carefully, try to hear the concern, and respond to each with an individualized, respectful reply, especially to the angry ones. Some people actually changed their position, but even those who continued to disagree with our strategy felt heard and therefore stayed engaged in the organization's work. A second lesson was this: you will never please everyone. I am a 64-year-old woman who was raised in the South. It is in my DNA to want to please. But pleasing everyone will never happen, ever. It's an obvious statement, but once I was finally able to take that in at a gut level, it was incredibly liberating. And a final lesson: don't be mean. Kindergarten wisdom, right? But the truth is that Love Makes a Family benefited from having mean opponents who seemed unable to simply argue that same-sex couples shouldn't be allowed to marry without calling us disgusting perverts intent on destroying traditional marriage. Be passionate, make your case, but do it without calling people names. It's a low bar, but one that will help your cause no matter what you're working for. Every single person in this room could add your own 3 leadership lessons to my list, because this is a room full of leaders. I would argue that although women have been a part of this college for less than a third of its history, our lessons about leadership have had and will continue to have a disproportionate and invaluable influence on Davidson and its goal to help students live lives of leadership and service. Thank you.
I'm currently an audio producer at the On Being project, where I work on 2 podcasts, On Being with Krista Tippett and Poetry and Found. And with any type of kind of media work or people who are really interested in storytelling, I think for me, I'm always really curious about questions and being critical about the world around us. And I think any form of media, especially podcasts, have this opportunity to help people see the questions that are in their lives and different ways that they can approach problems or the world or something that they might be experiencing. I think audio is just a really beautiful way to understand what other people are thinking and what they're experiencing, and then reflect that to audiences. I remember I had an assignment in Dr. Magdalena Maizpeña's Spanish course, probably my junior or senior year, where we actually had to make a podcast. And it was one of the first times that I ever actually put music underneath kind of audio of someone talking, and the person talking was myself in this case. And I just thought like, oh, wow, this is like art. This is something that you're kind of creating this container for a thought or question. And it was just the first time I'd ever done something like that. So it was a class that was about short stories. And so in class, we would all have come having read a story, and then we would just start asking questions to each other or thinking through what someone had heard. I remember we would sit in class and someone would point to like the 3rd word in the 2nd paragraph of the story, and we would just spend moments and time just like thinking through what that meant and what it was doing for the story. And that is exactly what I do in my current job. As we're recording this right now, I just got back from a wedding from a Davidson student who graduated in my year. And while I was at the wedding, I saw all of these other like friends and women who I had gone through Davidson with over those 4 years. And it really reminded me how these were the people who taught me what friendship was, what caring about another person was. And it's a moment that kind of reminded me, like, these were the women who kind of helped me become the person I am today. It was just a real joy to kind of see them throughout these different moments and changes in each of our lives.
And now, Kenzie Leonard.
It takes a village is a common phrase used in the African American community. For us, a village has more profound meaning than just family. My village consists of my immediate family, my godparents' family, my coaches, and my mentors. They have been with me through every step of the way of my life, whether that was going to my piano recitals, cheering me on at track meets, or celebrating my accomplishments no matter how big or small. Being surrounded by a community to uplift and support me led to me being a very community-oriented person. And that can be seen through the organizations and offices I'm involved with on campus. I'm a Bonner Scholar. I work in the Residence Life office as a resident advisor. I'm part of the Sigma Psi chapter of Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I'm the president of Patterson Court Circle, and I'm on the Davidson College cheerleading team. All of these organizations and offices have community as one of their core values. For instance, as a Bonner Scholar, I serve my community, and as a resident advisor, I build community on my floor. Coming to Davidson, it was difficult to find my own community at first because I came here during 2020 at the peak of COVID. So there were no social gatherings. We only met people through Zoom, or we had to be 6 feet apart. And it was really difficult to branch out and find new people. Thankfully, I had an amazing roommate who I'm still best friends with to this day, and I had great upperclassmen who reached out to us and brought us into their community. And I never realized how important it was to have my own community until I encountered a difficult academic experience my sophomore fall. I'm a political science and economics double major. Today, I'll be talking more about my economics major. In these classes, there are typically 6 to 7 women, and maybe 1 to 3 women of color. In this particular class I'm talking about, there were only 5 women, and 2 of those women were women of color, me included. And so I walk into class that day, and our teacher has broken us up into groups to take a quiz. And in my group, I'm the only woman. And so I sit down, and we're taking the quiz, and we're going through the questions, and we get to a question where I think it's one answer, and the other 2 members of my group think it's a different answer. And so I'm explaining to them why I think it's this answer, and I'm looking over the readings, so I'm trying to explain to them. And halfway through my explanation, I realize that they're not even listening to me. They've already decided that they're going to choose that answer. And so I stopped talking, and I let them complete the rest of the quiz and turn it in. We turn it in, and the teacher puts the quiz answers up on the board. It happens to be that my answer was correct. And in that moment, I don't know what I expected, but I kind of wanted some remorse from them. I wanted them to say, "Oh, Kenzie, sorry," or something to acknowledge that they were wrong. But they didn't. In fact, a member of my group shot their hand up and started arguing with the teacher about the answer. And so in that moment, I'm thinking in my head that not only did they not listen to my explanation, but by shooting their hand up and arguing with the teacher, they said there's no possible way that she could be right. And so I left class that day with a mix of anger and sadness, feeling dejected and drained. And so I called a member of my community who also happens to be an African-American woman and an economics major. And I tell her about this experience. And not only does she see and hear, not only do I feel seen and heard, but she also validates my feelings. And after that phone call, I have a renewed sense of energy. I go back into class the next day and the day after that, And I continue to use my voice. I continue to voice my opinions and voice my explanations. I never let anybody else have the power to silence me again. And I'm thankful for Davidson for bringing those people into my life, for being able to meet those people and form this amazing community. And even though some of those individuals are upperclassmen, they've graduated, I still talk to them today. We still celebrate each other's accomplishments. We still give each other advice. And I'm proud to say after 4 years, they're not just a part of my community anymore, they're also a part of my village. And as I look around this room today and see all these trailblazing women, including my mother and my godmother, I realize I can't lose my voice. I can't allow anybody to silence me. I have to be loud. I have to voice what I feel, even if there's no one else listening to me. Thank you.
I work for GSK, and in GSK, I work with global health programs, including partnerships to fight infectious diseases like TB, malaria, and neglected tropical diseases. We work to improve access to medicines and healthcare in lower income countries. Started as an economics major at Davidson. And that really opened up the world to me. Davidson did so much for me, but economics really opened up the world to me. And through that, I really became aware of the disparities and the inequities in the world. The relationship with Kathy Bray started after she had graduated from Davidson. So after graduation, she did a number of things, but one of the things she was doing while I was at Davidson was she was working with an organization called CARE. And so when being an economics major and wanting to learn more about the development field, I was put in touch with Kathy, and Kathy Bray gave me a chance. She hired me, she interviewed me and hired me as an intern. And Kathy, women like Kathy, she gave me a chance. She interviewed me. She was a sponsor and she was a mentor to me. And that made a big difference. And women made a big difference along the way in terms of sponsorship. It was through CARE that another woman introduced me to GSK, where I now work, and you made introductions for me. So it was really women looking out for women. And I really appreciate that.
And now, Janet Stovall.
So my junior year at Davidson, the Black Student Coalition invited Dr. Charles King as part of the MLK lecture series. He conducted a very controversial workshop on oppression. It made a whole lot of people mad. It made me mad. Basically, it reminded me of why I was mad all the time. And so when I was driving him back to the airport, I proceeded to tell him everything at Davidson that made me mad. And when I finally stopped and took a breath, he looked at me, he said, "You are the angriest little Black woman I have ever seen in my life." Fair, it was fair. But then he said something else. He said, "Why don't you stop getting mad and start getting meaningful?" From that moment forward, I've spent the rest of my life doing exactly 50% of what he said. Because I did get meaningful, but I never, ever stopped getting mad. And in fact, I have learned to follow what makes me mad. Before Dr. King, it was instinctive because that's who I am. After Dr. King, it has been intentional because that's who I became. The journey really started freshman year. I wrote this little poem, and it won first place in the literary magazine. But there are folks who did not like that poem. One person who didn't like that poem decided one night to throw a smoke bomb into Richardson 103 while my roommate Judy and I were asleep. Now that made me mad. That made me mad as hell. That turned me into that angry little Black woman that Dr. King was talking about. But at that point, it didn't really make me meaningful because there was something else that I needed to get to that point. I needed a process. Well, eventually I came up with a process. Passion to purpose to practice. Let me explain a little bit about what that means. At some point, you're going to go to a graduation and somebody's going to say, follow your passion. But what they don't tell you is there are two flavors of passion. There's love and there's anger. You can follow what makes you happy or you can follow what pisses you off. Now, if I'm your graduation speaker, I think it's pretty clear which way that conversation is going to go. But there's a reason for that. It's because anger is a powerful emotion. If you're happy, if you're following what makes you happy, you're not going to change anything. You're comfortable. Why would you? But if you are angry, you're going to do everything you can to stop whatever it is that's making you mad. Because anger is an emotion that tells you that a boundary has been crossed. Anger clarifies for you what's really important. And for me, what's important is racism. I am mad about racism every day, every minute. But I'm not mad about it exactly the same way every day, every minute. And that's because of phase 2 in this process, purpose. Now, purpose is not about mission. It's not about vision. It's not about aspiration. None of that woo-woo stuff. Purpose is about parameters. It's about shaping. It's about substance. Purpose is about naming what you can do and then claiming what you will do. The tough part about that, though, is a lot of times people don't take that step. That's the step they skip, which is why they never get to phase 3, which is about practice. And practice is the tough one, because practice is where following what makes you happy meets following what pisses you off. Because practice is about taking those things that you really believe in, that you love, the things that make you happy, and leveraging those things to fix the stuff that you truly cannot stand. So now, does this process work? Well, let me tell you how it's worked for me, and I'll let you be the judge of that. So after I took Dr. King to the airport, came back, locked myself into my apartment for 2 weeks and cried. And then I wrote Project 87. My senior year, I got really mad about the fact that you never saw a Black student interviewing for the highly coveted Morgan Stanley job. So I did the interview and I got the job. Over more decades than I'd like to say in corporate America, I've been mad about a whole lot of stuff. I am mad that I see Black women every day taking on more responsibility, but never getting the promotion that matches it. I am mad, personally, that I never saw a Black speechwriter working at the highest echelons of corporate America. And I was pretty mad that corporate America never seemed to care about doing anything about it. And so, since I follow what pisses me off, I started my own business and I ran it successfully for 21 years. I was, for a time, the only Black speechwriter writing at the CEO level in the entire Fortune 100. And I did a TED Talk that basically told corporate America, this is how you can dismantle systemic racism. Today, I'm a chief diversity officer, and I lead a global diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting practice. And you know what makes me mad right now? Leaders. Leaders who are willing to stand up and shout about what their values are, but step back the minute it's time to live them. And so, since I follow what pisses me off, I have donated money to start Project 2037 at Davidson. Project 2037 is about making Davidson the epicenter of building inclusive leaders. Whereas Project 87 was about making Davidson a more comfortable place for Black students, Project 2037 is about Davidson making the world better for all of us. So in the end, here's what I've learned. It is okay to stay mad as long as you work at being meaningful. And it's all about the process. Passion, follow what makes you mad. Purpose, focus on what you can fix. And then practice, follow what pisses you off. Stay mad, get meaningful. And I'll tell you this, if you follow what makes you happy, I guarantee you, you will have a great life. But if you follow what pisses you off, you just might change the world.
Actually, it all really started at Davidson because my senior year, I had decided by then I wanted to be a writer, and from some of it was, because I didn't really think I was going to be able to make a living doing much. I wasn't good in math, and I didn't want to be a lawyer because my father was a lawyer, and writing seemed to be something that came naturally to me. And so, right after college, right after I graduated, I got a job at the Charlotte Observer. So I roaming the desks, taking any story anybody would let me do for overtime. And I was doing so many overtime stories that they promoted me within 6 months to being the police reporter. And they thought the skinny little blonde who was only like 21 or so years old would be disarming as a cop, doing the cop stuff. And that is what changed my life. I'd never had any exposure to crime before. Rivaling reporters in Charlotte called me the Scoop because I literally one time was walking through the hallway in the police department and one of the detectives slipped a note in my hand and kept on going. And it was to let me know that these three guys that had hacksawed their way out of death row in Georgia had ended up in Mecklenburg County, right outside of Charlotte, and that the police were looking for them. And I broke that story and worked on that for 2 days and nights without going to bed. And I was actually riding around in the car looking for these guys until it occurred to me that maybe I didn't want to find them. I liked doing books and I was interested in crime. I put the two together. Davidson was a ride that got me where I wanted to go. I had to go, once I got launched, I was going to go where I was going to go. But if it hadn't been Davidson, I wouldn't have ended up at the Charlotte Observer. And the other thing is it taught me to think about things that I might want to do that seem ridiculous. And instead of laughing at it, they'd say, "You really want to do that? Okay." I do think that my education, my years at Davidson and being around such progressive people that think big, and most of all, like Einstein said, it's not about what you learn, it's about learning to use your mind. It's not what you memorize, it's learning to think. And I learned how to think at Davidson.
And now, Natalie Russell.
The summer before coming to Davidson, every new student is required to submit a form to figure out their housing situation for their first year on campus. Now, there's two parts to this form. One's a little more notable than the other. The first, it's basic. You're submitting information about your living habits. Are you neat or are you a slob? Do you stay up till midnight or are you lights out by 9? Are you up early or are you sleeping till noon? That one's pretty easy. The second one is looking at your personality traits to find out your Myers-Briggs indicator, to pair you with a roommate, and to put you on a hall based on your personality type. Upon getting to campus, I realized that a lot of people had given a lot of thought to that second part of the survey, their personality. It's a big deal. I realized I was the only one who got worked up over the first part of the survey, the one that was supposed to be easy. But here's where I got stuck. There was a part of that form asking whether or not you wanted to live on an all-girls floor. To get into college, competition is inevitable. You have to be able to be the best in your class, to get a higher GPA, to get the best letters of recommendation, team captain, club president, all of those things, and you're competing against each other. We're used to that. But outside of that, there happens to be this nature of competition between girls that I experienced a lot growing up. It's not fun. It's crappy. It makes people feel bad about themselves. And it doesn't lead to any productive experiences. So when I had to decide whether or not to indicate whether I wanted to live with all girls or not, I freaked out. I have a brother and a sister, so I was pretty used to the whole cohabitation situation. But I was also drawn to the optimistic possibility of really enjoying living with all women at Davidson. So I took the easy way out and I said, you know what, residence life, it's up to you. You can figure it out. I said, I don't care, whatever. And they knew what they were doing. On move-in day, I moved into the 4th floor of EH Little Dormitory with 17 other women, all freshmen, all figuring out what the heck we were going to do for 4 years. We were all terrified, me especially. I'm shocked I even got in the car to come to campus. I was so scared. But I did it, and I got there, and I was surrounded by 17 other women, all of whom were terrified but eager to create a community. I never gave it much thought again between submitting the form and getting to campus, but when I moved in and I was seeing all these faces eagerly poking their heads out of doors or parents dragging them into the hallway to make a new friend, I was excited because I said, you know what? This looks like a good group of girls. And it ended up becoming the biggest launching pad of my experience with community at Davidson. The 18 of us had one of the most positive living experiences that I've ever had throughout my time here. And it truly changed who I am today. We laughed together, we watched movies together, we cooked, we ate, we studied. We did a lot of good stuff, and it was amazing. But we also deal with a lot of the growing pains of both coming to college and just growing up in general. Learning to deal with Davidson's intense academic environment took a learning curve, but the tricky thing is, that's a really independent thing to do. It's something that's unique to everybody. We all have our own experiences with how are you going to write a paper? How are you going to engage with professors? How are you going to study for a test? But the growing pains outside of the academics is where we really came together. How are you going to live on your own? How are you going to deal with roommate troubles? What happens when you're sick for the first time away from your family? How do you stay in touch with your parents when you're no longer seeing them every day? What happens when, as we're inevitably getting older, pets pass away or grandparents get sick and you're not home for that? That is where this community on 4th Little really, really impacted me. Coming back together at the end of every single day to either laugh, cry, make fools of ourselves, celebrate successes, work through failures. It was truly, truly exceptional. The song that played when I walked out here today isn't your typical hype song per se. And to be totally honest, no offense to those who are, I'm not generally the biggest country music fan. I go to school in the South. I'm from North Carolina, so don't keep this stays between us. But when I heard that 4 independent female country stars were all coming together to form a supergroup called the High Women, I said, you know what? I'll give it a listen. Worth a shot, right? The song you just heard a clip of is called Crowded Table, and I really, really recommend listening to it all on your own at some point. Find me later today and we can have like a listening party. I don't know. But there's a lot of really meaningful lyrics in that song to me. But the one that I want to highlight is the second half of the chorus. It says, let us take on the world while we're young and we're able, and bring us back together when the day is done. Let me be clear. I do not want to negate the first half of those words I just said. Take on the world while we're young and we're able. It's amazing, right? That's what we're in college to do, supposedly. Learn how to navigate the world. Learn how to change the world. You're hearing from so many amazing speakers who are talking about their experiences making a difference in the lives of both themselves and others. I really want to focus on the second half of that lyric. Bring us back together when the day is done. Deconstructing those notions of competition to create communities rooted in cheering for each other, crying with each other, succeeding as a group is what Davidson has taught me more than anything else. What does it matter if you go out by yourself and are a strong, independent woman if you don't have that community to share it with. Even if that community is created for you, like my freshman year living situation was, or throughout the rest of my time at Davidson, I've had to create that community for myself sometimes. I've had to be very intentional about finding spaces where I feel supported, loved, and where I have space to screw up. That's just as important, if not more important, than the first half of the lyric, if you ask me. And so you can't live on a freshman dorm forever, tragically. You have to move on. And so after our first year, the 18 of us all ended up going our separate ways and living in various random dorms across campus. And some of them are still my closest friends in the world. Others I give a hug to when I see walking down the street in campus. And it's still the most impactful experience throughout my Davidson time. I'd really, really recommend listening to that song, but then being intentional about how can you build this community? Whether it's pulling up a chair yourself or going to IKEA and buying the table and setting it up. Trust me, I've been there, done that. Crowded tables, both metaphorical and physical, are, in my opinion, what are going to change the world. Thank you.
Came to Davidson pretty undifferentiated, like many liberal arts college students, but knew I had an interest in science, and so gravitated towards those courses. And that's where I learned that science was not just memorizing a textbook, that it was about asking a question, designing an experiment, and making new observations. And so that pulled me into the sciences. But while I had the skill set that I was gaining from that coursework, I didn't have the motivation of how would I apply it. And I got that motivation when I had the opportunity to travel to Zambia through the Davidson and Mwandi program, started by Verna Case, and was able to spend time at a rural mission hospital in Zambia at a time when the HIV virus was the pandemic of the era. The work that I do is really aims to provide every child with a healthy start to life. I work on vaccines that could prevent HIV from infecting young individuals, as well as cytomegalovirus, which is the most common cause of congenital infections. But as our world has changed and as we've seen more and more pandemic pathogens come to interrupt our social systems, I've started to study those as well. Gender is certainly present in everything I've done, including at Davidson, being able to gain confidence as a woman in science and research without feeling like I was held back by gender barriers. But then also recognizing that these biases are present, and you have to navigate it as a woman, as a leader, and in an area that is not always highly populated by other people. And so I think, of course, the coeducation was so critical to my development, and also I think giving many women the platform that they need to carry through with the knowledge that these gender biases will be present, and that you have the confidence to take them on.
And for our final presentation of the afternoon, Carol Quillen.
So it's my first big alumni event at Davidson. There are some women there, alums, many spouses. I'm nervous. Even though I'm the president, I don't have a graduation year on my name tag. I don't know very many people, and I'm the main attraction. So pretty soon, all these people milling around, eating fancy finger food, drinking from the bourbon bar, are gonna walk into this hall to listen to me talk. I'm a little nervous. So while I'm walking around campus, trying to remember people's names, trying to remember the names of the buildings, so incredibly grateful to be in this special and beautiful place, a colleague introduces me to a really kind-looking woman, also with no graduation year after her name. And she opens her arms, she smiles, she holds out her hand, and she says, "Well, look at you in your slutty shoes." These shoes. Here's some other things folks have said. Whose trophy wife are you? Davidson doesn't need your radical, woke, communist agenda. You know, you'd look more approachable if you wore your hair down. Obviously, you're not a real Christian. Are you trying to kill us? The people who said these things had made up whole life histories for me based on little or no information. That's what people do. Humans love stories. And when we don't know a true one, we're quite happy to make one up. And it's usually one that conforms with our worldview. But the thing is, these stories that we make up can be very, very wrong. And that's why sometimes strangers or even friends can present us with a version of ourselves that we don't recognize. And it's blindsiding and it hurts. So when this happens, when someone presents you with a you, imagines this you that you don't recognize, what do? So most of us want to just feel less vulnerable in that moment, and we do what makes us feel better. We play their game. We make up the worst story imaginable about them, their sordid past, their evil motives, their terrible character, and we load up and we shoot back. It's very gratifying. There's nothing like a good versus evil story when you get to define the bad guy and you get to play the hero. It's also what everyone else seems to be doing. I mean, look around in Washington, in the news, and especially on social media, people are doing a lot of loading up and shooting back. It's gratifying, but it's not always the best course of action. The story you make up is almost certainly incomplete. It's probably distorted, and it could be completely wrong. We're all more than the worst thing we've ever said or the worst thing we've ever done. So right before the 2016 election, I thought I understood every potential voter for Donald Trump. I had designed this whole classification system in my mind, and there were 4 types, and every Trump voter fit into one of those types. Soon after the election, I actually asked a person who voted for Trump why. And he said he was really worried about healthcare for the working poor and middle-income Americans. That defied my classification system. And we ended up having a really long conversation about how to make healthcare good and affordable for everyone. When we make up these stories about each other, trade insult for insult and barb for barb, we really don't accomplish anything. And we end up widening the chasms that already separate us, these chasms that are polarizing our country and that lead us to see every issue in terms of stark, binary, reductionist either-or choices. Either individual rights or gun safety, either a wall with no door or open borders, either free speech or inclusivity, either Palestinian lives or Israeli lives. Instead of making up these stories about one another, if we just lay that down, we can do something different. We can get curious. We can lay down our arms and let ourselves ask questions. Why would this person say this? Getting curious means you're more interested in listening than in talking. It means you're more interested in learning than in wounding. Wounding is easy. All human beings can be hurt. We're fragile and we're flawed. Learning's hard. It takes courage. And learning how to build a shared future, that takes real courage. Don't get me wrong. There are real jerks out there. There are racist, misogynist people out there, and you can build a bridge and they will tear it down and throw it in your face. But our attachments to the stories we make up keep us from seeing the other true stories, the real stories that represent the real lives of the people with whom we want to connect. If we don't see those stories, we're stuck. We never make any progress, and we just stay exactly where we are. So since that time, over a decade ago at my first amazing Davidson event, I've gotten to know the woman who made the comment about my shoes. She's amazing. She's kind, she's smart, she's thoughtful, she's funny. And she said those words in a gesture of solidarity, you know, kind of like, you go, girl. There are a lot of these men around, you do you, and when they hurt you, I've got your back. If I had stuck with the story I made up about her, I would have lost the gift of her friendship. So getting curious, though risky, it's worth the risk. It lets you have confidence in yourself no matter what anyone else says. It lets you build relationships and trust even though you know you might get hurt. It lets you live with your heart and your mind and your eyes wide open to this amazing, cruel, and beautiful world. And it lets you build the future that you want to see from this amazing place. Thank you.